All right, welcome to the School Psychology Review Zoom webinar focused on unlocking the promise of multi-tiered systems of support for linguistically diverse students. Today we'll be featuring special presentations from Dr. Jorge Gonzalez, Dr. Sylvia, Linan, Thompson. Unfortunately, Dr. Lillian Duran is not able to be with us today. And then myself, Shane Jimerson, I'll be moderating and facilitating the discussion. And it's great to see how many folks we already have logged on today for this special topic discussion and featuring the forthcoming special topic journal publication that will focus on MTSS for linguistically diverse students. Some of you have already filled out the poll that you saw on your screen as you came in, and I can give you a brief summary that today we already have about, it's about a third students, about a third practitioners, and about a third faculty, and just a few others. So good balance across the way. Great to see the interest and enthusiasm among all different folks. And again, appreciate those students participating. You are the future of the field and the future of the education professionals, so we're grateful for your participation, as well as the practitioners and the faculty. In terms of the importance of the topic today, 84% of folks that filled out and now are already attending highlighted this topic as among the most pressing in education. So very important topic, likely why you took time today to come in and share a bit of time to get some more information and think about this further. The third question that was featured in the poll is, what topics do you believe we need to focus on the most in future research to advance science, practice, and policy relevant to the use of MTSS to promote the success of linguistically diverse students? And in looking through the responses there, we encourage folks to choose the top three. And when we look across the board, many of these were identified as important, but in particular, some that rose to the top were the role of sociocultural context in assessment, as well as effective tiered instruction for linguistically diverse students with learning challenges, and also the evidence-based interventions with linguistically diverse students and their use within MTSS. So those were all endorsed at over 50%. So thanks to those who were able to share some information on the poll, and it's a nice way to provide a transition and get a little bit of information as you transition in. So let me go ahead and put that out of the way for a moment. And again, now that hopefully folks are on and locked in, just wanted to say again, welcome to our session today. For those of you that have not been following School Psych Review on social media, we certainly encourage you to. You can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. And again, this session and many others are each recorded and then posted on the School Psych Review YouTube channel. So this session will be up there here probably later today, as well as each of the other sessions that we've been doing. And you also see that there's opportunities to get more information about articles that are published in School Psych Review, recognizing authors and contributors to School Psych Review amidst the social media, and also information about forthcoming special topic sections and articles that are being published, and also access to free articles that are available online. Of course, members of the National Association of School Psychologists, they all have access to all of the articles. But in addition to that, we often are making free articles available every month. And those that are following us on social media have access to that just by simply clicking on it and then going to the Taylor and Francis website and being able to access. And especially on these important topics that are aimed towards advancing diversity and equity and social justice, both in the field of school psychology as well as education, special education, and broadly. And we're really looking to engage and embrace our interdisciplinary colleagues. And so that's why today it's a special treat to have colleagues from both school psychology and beyond. So that's just briefly a little bit of information about the session today. I just wanted to highlight before we launch into the core agenda items that you can see the special topic call for submissions on the National Association of School Psychologists website. And you can also see this information such as the posting on the Taylor and Francis website as well. So if you're looking for either of those, you can just simply type in school psychology review, and if you typed in special topic sections, it would pull up the one on one side of the screen. If you typed school psych review, Taylor and Francis, you would be able to find access to the Unlocking the Promise of MTSS and for linguistically diverse students for more details and information. So just wanted to bring those to your awareness as well. Okay, so the first item of business is to do a couple of brief introductions.
All right, I'm Jorge Gonzalez. I'm a professor at the University of Houston. I focus on language and literacy development in dual language learners and the home literacy environment, the impact of the home literacy environment on language and literacy development.
And thank you, Jorge, for sharing and having the other excitement of information. Do you want to briefly introduce Dr. Duran, and then we'll have Sylvia introduce herself?
Yeah, I'll have actually Sylvia. Sylvia, do you want to introduce since you work with Lillian? You're muted.
Yep, there I go. Got it. Sure. So Lillian Duran is an associate professor and also associate dean in the College of Education at the University of Oregon. Her interest is with early childhood, and in particular, her research is around developing assessments for emergent bilingual students. And she has been working in the last few years in developing an assessment for identifying early literacy skills in children. And she's also been working on the renorming of IPEL in this currently and in the next few years.
Excellent, thank you. And a little bit about yourself, Sylvia, yeah, as well.
So my name is Sylvia Linan Thompson, and I'm also an associate professor at the University of Oregon. And my area of interest is the intervention and assessment of English learners. And I have been doing research in that area for quite a bit. Most of it, a lot of it around the intervention part around within the context of MTSS. And more recently, I've been looking at writing and writing development and really thinking about how we assess students who are second language learners.
Excellent, thank you. And I didn't properly introduce myself at the beginning, but my name is Jimerson. I'm the editor of School Psychology Review. I'm also a professor here at the University of California at Santa Barbara. I focus on school psychology and really embrace the good fortune and opportunity to collaborate with colleagues across multiple fields, interdisciplinary, throughout California, throughout the country, around the world, and really focusing on trying to facilitate children's cognitive, academic, social, emotional, behavioral, as well as mental health development and success. And especially here in our local context in Southern California, as we've been working on developing implementation of MTSS infrastructures, a population of English language learners and the unique knowledge and needs of the children and the families has become incredibly salient and so important that we continue to do more work and engage and learn more to meet the needs of these all children and families. So it's a little bit about my background related to this. So with that, we'll go ahead and just share that the items we have included here will provide a brief bit of information about the context related to this topic, the importance of this topic, the purpose of the special topic section that will be forthcoming, which we're wanting to share, highlight, as well as get ideas from you about what might be optimal to include. We'll highlight briefly information about the types of manuscripts that we anticipate, mention the due date, and then also our intent is to have time for questions and answers at the end as well. So that's where we're going. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jorge and Sylvia to share some great information with you.
All right, thank you, Shane. I think I'm almost speaking to the choir out there, which is really good. So some statistics that I wanted to share with you, Latinx students, accounted for almost half the population growth between 2000 and 2010. And as important, 30% of these were English language learners or English learners. One thing I want to qualify is early on in discussions for this webinar, We chose to use linguistically diverse learners because most of us know that it's not just English language learners, it's dual language learners, they're language minority students. So we felt that this phrase, sort of linguistically diverse students encompassed a broader and was more inclusive. Now, at present in our schools, at least latest statistics, 22.7% of all students enrolled in schools are Latinx. So this gives you sort of a context of the growing numbers of both Latinx students, but English, linguistically diverse students in the population.
Excellent. Next slide. Yeah. There you go.
Okay. So one of the reasons that this topic is important and why, and I think especially in the last few years, we've seen a lot more research with students who are emergent bilinguals or linguistically diverse students, is because they tend to not perform as well academically as other students. And, you know, so here 2 decades of research reveals that English learners consistently perform below non-ELs, as you can see there, and not just by a little, by quite a large percentage. And so, and even though it's improving slightly, it's still not anywhere where we would like to be. But I think there's one thing, one of the advances I think that we have seen in the field, and especially in how we think about research with second language learners, is to really think about who the comparison group is, right? So it wouldn't make sense if English learners were doing as well as monolingual English learners, and that's not really the comparison group that we would, the group that we would want to compare them to, right? So one of the things that has started maybe, I would say maybe even 10 years ago, is when we did research with English learners, we also thought about, well, let's include students that have been reclassified, who are no longer considered English language learners, and would sometimes go back about 3 years, sometimes 4 years, to think about, you know, well, how are those kids doing, right? How much are they growing? But even beyond that, more recently, we're starting to think is, well, one of the things we still don't know in terms of research with linguistically diverse learners is what typical development is when you're a second language learner, right? And so those students that exit very early, that go on to be very successful. And there's a few people in Oregon, but also in other places, that have started to include those students, and the term used for them is ever-L. So that includes anybody that was ever classified as an English learner, usually beginning in kindergarten, but may have already exited. And what that helps us is to understand how, if you will, those high-performing linguistically diverse students do, and that way gives us an idea of what typically, or what typical growth might be for students who are learning in a second language. So, you know, as we move forward, we might come back to revisit that and think about how we can get a clearer picture of student growth and development when we have those different comparison groups.
Excellent.
So let's talk a little bit about multi-tiered systems of support. Most of us, I think most of the audience listening, understands that multi-tiered systems of support is a tiered, data-based, approach to providing to early identification and support for students experiencing challenges in learning and behavior. Typically, you have tier 1, which is high quality instruction, universal screening, in general education for all students. Students who need a little extra support, meeting benchmarks, get that assistance in tier 2. And students who continue to struggle receive interventions of increasing intensity in tier 3. So multi-tiered systems of support drive educational decisions about intensity and duration of interventions based on response to that instruction. But in recent years, and most who are practitioners will tell you that despite the model of multi-tiered systems of supports, there are many, many unanswered questions when we are talking about linguistically diverse students. Questions about the validity of the assessment practices, questions about the core instruction, questions about the social cultural context. And Sylvia, Lillian, and I have been discussing taking a more ecologically or ecoculturally sensitive approach to understanding MTSS when discussing and working with linguistically diverse students.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm. So one area, as and I sort of already talked about this, one area that we are focusing on what are the challenges of implementing MTSS with culturally linguistically diverse students. To begin with, and I certainly, my colleague Sylvia Thompson can speak more to this, is that the the research for evidence-based practices with English language learners itself is incomplete. So when you add that on top of multi-tiered systems of support, you begin to ask questions about database decision-making, assessment, and instruction, and leaves many unexplored questions about MTSS with linguistically diverse students.
So, and just to go on from what Jorge was saying, I think when we look especially at the research that's been done to date around MTSS and culturally and linguistically diverse students, we see a lot of research, or we have a lot of research around tier 2 or interventions for students that are at risk, which is really helpful. And so we know, especially around reading, we're starting to get some of that around math, and even a little bit around tier 3. But one area where we don't have a lot of research is around tier 1, mm-hmm. right? And so if we think about tier 1 as being the gate that, the first gate, if you will, I think if we focus on what kinds of evidence-based or promising practices we can find for tier 1, right, it would help with that movement of students into tier 2. I mean, tier 2, if students need it, is great, but we really want to make sure that they're getting that really strong. So I would say in terms of area, that would be one area. Obviously, another area where we don't have a lot of research is around just language development and the role of language, that intersection of language with instruction and assessment. A third one is when we think about about MTSS, again, you might see research with Spanish done in Spanish for students receiving instruction in Spanish. You might see English instruction for students that are receiving instruction in their second language in English. But the other area, and because it's difficult to do, is sort of that intersection, right? What happens when those kids are transitioning either in a dual language or in a more traditional transitional bilingual program from Spanish to English, right? And how does being in that space affect instruction, and particularly assessment, and how we identify kids for more intensive services? So there's definitely, as Jorge mentioned, a lot of gaps, and hopefully some of you that are considering to submit have been exploring or thinking about some of those gaps in the literature.
I'm going to add one more thing. Thank you, Sylvia. I concur that we're hoping that folks who will consider exploring these really important questions in the literature, and this, virtual paucity of research in these important questions. One other area that my colleagues and I have spoken about is the assessment, the general outcome measures. What do we add, what do we incorporate to our assessment practices to contextualize the findings and the performance of children who are learning a second language? Is it just sufficient? Is it just sufficient to do the Spanish dibbles, either? Or do we need to look wider? Do we need to take a more ecological approach into how we do these assessment decisions? Because these assessment decisions have real world consequences, as they do for all kids who receive assessment, but in particular in unique ways for English language learners or linguistically diverse children that impact the trajectory, their learning trajectories and their experiences in schools. And one area that is not researched very much is the social emotional contributors that are found at the same time as second language acquisition. There are many that are relatively unexplored. So those of you who explore those areas, it would be highly encouraged to look at that.
Excellent.
So we sort of already talked a little bit about this slide. We are interested in manuscripts that look at the advances, challenges, and opportunities in implementing multi-tiered systems of support with linguistically diverse students, especially Spanish-speaking Latinx students. For the arguments we made earlier about the percentages of the population who speak Spanish. So what are the challenges? What are some of the opportunities? And what are some of the advances? We look to you, our colleagues on this webinar, to guide us in areas that we ourselves don't explore, but are very interested in learning about through your submissions.
Right, and if I just might add, I mean, I think we have focused quite a bit on maybe the classroom, but I think there's a lot of areas in terms of systems and how districts, for examples, or even schools go about implementing MTSS, and also thinking about MTSS in schools that have high numbers of linguistically diverse students in terms of, you know, do they have parallel systems? Do they have integrated systems? What seems to work? You know, how do they make decisions? How do they track data from one language to the other and make decisions, right? So there's definitely a lot of system level questions, as well as, you know, just classroom teaching practices that, I mean, where we definitely still need a lot more research. And even more questions as well.
Absolutely. So most of you who read the call for today's webinar, we posed a couple questions that are of interest to me as a senior editor, my colleagues, and hopefully to you. Areas that are relatively unexplored are the socio-cultural context in which assessment and intervention in linguistically diverse students. This goes back to the point I made earlier, and my colleague Sylvia has alluded to, is that taking a more ecologically sensitive approach that involves multi-tiered systems of support that inform the decisions that are made by school systems and decision-making teams. Also as important, and I know many of you have experienced this, how do we distinguish reading problems from reading disabilities among linguistically diverse students in MTSS? This is a critical question we have faced, not only among monolingual speakers, but even more so among linguistically diverse speakers. And what does effective instruction for linguistically diverse learners in MTSS look like? So this begs the question, what are the evidence-based practices for effective instruction for linguistically diverse learners? And I think my colleague Sylvia can speak more to this, but this goes back to the point I made earlier, that there still is many gaps in the literature on evidence-based practices with linguistically diverse students in terms of instruction. Sylvia, do you have anything, I know this is an area that you look at. We're good.
Okay. And hopefully Sylvia is still.
There you go. I wasn't able to unmute myself.
Okay.
Okay.
So sorry. Yes, I mean, I think I think the second one in particular, the second question on how we distinguish reading problems from reading disabilities is really important because it kind of goes both ways, right? What we hear a lot when we're talking about emergent bilinguals or linguistically diverse students from schools and teachers are one of two things. One thing is that students are identified for needing more intensive interventions very quickly because they just don't meet a score on an assessment, right? Without sort of that ecological lens and thinking about things like, their prior experience, learning experience, opportunities to learn English and things like that. But equally important is when schools wait too long, right? And so students that actually need help because they have a reading disability don't get it because schools are afraid to provide more intensive interventions or even refer them because they're not sure if it's a reading disability or a language issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why I think that piece about language and the role it plays in learning is so critical and one that has not been studied at all or very little in terms of MTSS and how it contributes to learning. And so I think that's one area. So distinguishing reading, but this clarification is really important in how we think about it. And I think that same is true for the last one. How does effective English instruction for linguistically diverse students in MTSS look like? And again, I think a lot of what we see in interventions, and I can honestly say I've been guilty of this in the past, is that we tend to focus on the skill, right? On, whether it's the reading or writing or math. And again, don't pay enough attention to their English language development. I mean, we hear a lot more about it now, it's the awareness of academic language and the role that plays and how students that maybe learn to decode easily then later have trouble with comprehension because they don't have the vocabulary, have developed enough vocabulary because we maybe haven't paid enough attention to language development, right? So again, all these things sort of feed into that bigger first question about the social cultural context, right? What are pieces that we might be missing when we have a more narrow focus in how we intervene with students?
Excellent, excellent. Really great information. Thank you both. This is a moment during our SPR Zoom webinar to sort of take a moment to check in. And in this instance, all the more valuable because I know we got a brief poll here for those of you that want to take a look at that. And what we did was ended up locking down the room so that more folks didn't come in, or particularly the individual might return. So Ryan's been busy taking care of that. And of course, lots of folks have been wanting to be back in or wanting to be in, but we're not sure which individual was doing the other activities. Just want to point out that Ryan is accepting questions. You can chat to him directly and privately, because those of you that were not aware, there was also a lot of information coming into the chat, which was also inappropriate. So as we look at how things are going, 94% Jorge and Sylvia say just right. The pace is just right. So this is fantastic. And what about your clarity and understanding? 76% say very clear. So well done so far, Sylvia, Jorge. That's fantastic, even with the bit of disruption that's going on there. And thank you, Ryan, for helping to triage the whole situation, but also for getting some more questions and information. I did want to point out there was one piece of information that folks might be interested in, that Julia Esparza Brown has a resource to mention that perhaps Sylvia and Jorge are aware of. Julia has one of 3 model demo grants from OSEP that focus on tiers 2 and 3 interventions within MTSS for English language learners in grades 3 through 5. And on their website, they include 3 model demos on their website and lots of free resources. So I just wanted to mention that it is at MTSS 4, the number 4, and then els.org. So again, that's MTSS4els.org. And that could be a great resource for many of you that have come on today to learn more about some of the specific interventions and such, in particular their efforts. And certainly we're hoping that they're going to feature this great work that they're doing, this research, in the upcoming special topics section that Jorge and Sylvia and Lillian are editing. So thank you for that information. That was very valuable. There's another question that I think we'll save until the end that I did see in there. So thank you, Joe, for sending us that note. We will have time at the end here to also provide some responses to some specific questions. Okay, so that's the update right now. And let me go ahead and continue on. There's a little bit more information for us to share.
So the types of manuscript we encourage folks to think about submitting are commentaries and position papers, theoretical and conceptual papers, systematic reviews, qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods empirical investigations. Basically, I know many of us take different approaches to the work we do, and we're very interested in looking at manuscripts that help us along the continuum in understanding the role of MTSS in linguistically diverse students and all the topics we have discussed earlier, the issues around transition, issues around socio-linguistic, social-cultural aspects involved, around instruction, core instruction, and beyond. So we look forward to receiving these manuscripts and working on them.
Excellent. Thanks, Jorge. And often folks ask, what's the general length of manuscripts? And 35 pages is the recommended length. But if it needs to go beyond that, it's really about the quality, not the quantity, right? So really, if you need to have more pages than that, it's important to provide a justification, rationale in the cover letter so that the editors can consider that. Obviously, there's limited pages in every journal, but we do want to encourage the range of scholarship as well as trying to keep that succinctly stated within the 35 pages, maybe even using some supplementary online materials as a way to supplement if needed. But sometimes folks ask that question. The other question that I think folks will ask is, well, when are these manuscripts due? When are you looking for papers? So some of you may have papers available presently, and you're welcome to submit those. But each of the editors will be available for further communications to manage manuscripts throughout. But really, we're looking at October is when we anticipate the bulk majority of these papers will be submitted to the journal. So by October 21st, we're looking for these submissions to come in to the School Psych Review portal, which those of you who are not familiar with what that is, here it is as the address, just www.tnfonline.com/USPR. But I can also show you a quick look at what it looks like there. So when you come into the portal, you can see that there's an option to submit an article. There's an option to look at new content. If you'd like to get regular updates about every new article that's featured in School Psych Review, all you need to do is subscribe to this particular Taylor and Francis School Psych Review portal, and it will just send them over to your email whenever they come out. Because again, most papers, well, each of the papers that are accepted are then generally available online first within 30 days of acceptance. So even though a topic might not be featured until a certain date in the future, those articles are generally available online first within 30 days. And this site also has a link to each of those special topic sections that I mentioned previously. You can see the most forthcoming special topic is the one that we're discussing today. But there's a lot of other special topic sections that we're also featuring that some of you might also have an interest in. So just wanted to highlight that for you. You can get more information about instructions for authors, again, using basic APA style format, most recent version, and they have some other guiding information in there. One piece of information that you'll probably be interested in as related to this topic, as well as all the others, is that for each paper that's submitted to School Psych Review, we do ask that the authors include an impact statement. And that's different from an abstract. The abstract describes sort of in detail what the foundations are, the methods are, the key findings are, and other bits of detailed information. The impact statement is intended to be written in plain, simple language. It's a couple of sentences, and it's really to highlight the so what question. What can we do with this information? What can we do with this science? What can we do with the content of this research that's featured in this paper? So the impact statement is required for all submissions to School Psych Review. And I just give you that heads up, both as a potential author, but also as a potential reader of the journal and these papers, is that you can look at the impact statement to really try to obtain a clear sense of what it is that this manuscript may have to offer for you as a practitioner, for you as a scholar, for you, someone who's interested in this topic and not quite sure what the, what the essence of that particular paper might be. So I just mentioned that as well. If you have other questions, I know, as you go through this process, we'll be able to answer some today, but if you have more technical questions about formatting or other pieces or just the general emphasis, I know that both Jorge, Sylvia, Lillian, they'll each be available via email and that sort of thing. Okay, and then we wanted to open it up to some questions. I know we've already got a few that have appeared in the chat. And again, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, given our context of the Zoom bomb scenario, you might be best off just privately chatting with Ryan Farmer, or I guess myself, Shane Jimerson, and I'll be able to see these here. But one question that came up, I know previously during our short break there, was I think for Jorge and Sylvia to reflect on, are there any special tips for ruling out cultural language factors? So for instance, Joe says, I know that this, the CLIM language survey tools, interviews are helpful tools in assessment, but is there anything else that we are missing to guide us with teasing out these pieces when making decisions about interventions or special education evaluations? So I don't know if either of you have more thoughts about that particular question.
So I have a thought. It depends on the target group. So I primarily work in early childhood, and it's not uncommon for, I work in, most of the work I do is in preschool, that a lot of the English language learners grow up in economically challenging environments, but are also dual language learners. So it's a confound. And it's often difficult to tease it out. I mean, I'm not the first to publish this, but many of these kiddos, begin with challenges that are significant in just oral language. And being able to know that from the beginning, it helps certainly me in my research to understand their proficiency levels in both languages at the very beginning, before they begin this educational track. What I'm talking about is the pre-loss or the loss, or because the home language inventory doesn't help a whole lot that schools typically give to kiddos. It doesn't tell me a lot. So in terms of social cultural characteristics, any others, Sylvia, that you might think about?
No, I mean, I would say that one of the things, for example, that we are really interested in is growth, right? Rate of growth. Because one of the things that we're starting to see is, especially when you look at that typical, what I would call typical emergent bilinguals or linguistically diverse students, right? The students that grow and go on to be very successful, right? If we use those sort of as our metric and see how much they grow, that gives us a good idea of what typical growth is when you're learning in a second language,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so students that fail to grow, I think is, to me, failure to grow would be sort of like the first marker, right? And then I think look at other things, the social cultural things, like, well, how long have they been learning in this language? You know, are there other factors in the home or in the community that might be the cause of this failure to grow? But I think, so to me, that's sort of the way I look at it. And I tend to work more in elementary to middle school elementary to middle school students, you know, so, you know, sort of that first language, if they're not receiving instruction in the first language, fails to be a good marker, right? Because they're just not getting instruction anymore. And so I think it's really, I think that is one of the challenges, is that situations are so variable, right? Communities differ. It's very different being one of 2 or 3 emergent bilinguals in a school as opposed to a school with 60% emergent bilinguals, right? Sort of the context of the school, the context of the community might be very different. How much language, how much they hear in each of the language and engage in each of the languages, you know, might impact that. So I think one of the things that we need to do as a field too is sort of systematically work through some of those variables and figure out, are there some that have more impact than others? For me, that's like a big question still, you know, what should we focus on in terms of determining which factors or variables have more of an impact on learning?
You know, I'm going to add, thank you, Sylvia. I'm going to add one more thing. So, you know, you mentioned the home environment, and I want to emphasize that doing a comprehensive language profile of the home environment is very useful. For example, in some of the work I've done, we have found that older siblings who speak already English because they've learned it influence the rate of acquisition in English in younger children who are learning English compared to little ones who don't have siblings who already speak English. So when you begin to look at the social cultural environment, also consider the classroom setting, you know, the amount of Spanish versus English talk from the teacher. So there's quite a few factors. And also for a lot of you who do study Latinos, there are certain cultural values that intersect, like respeto and bien educado, that often intersect with how children behave in classrooms that may be misattributed often to shyness, for example, in early childhood. So lots of exciting, really thought-provoking social cultural indicators, as Sylvia alluded to, that have just not been investigated in terms of language acquisition and by default, MTSS.
Excellent. These are really great points, and both of you are providing us with some really great information and important considerations. I've been also looking at some of the questions, all other questions that are being posted here, as well as some of the key points that are being made. Again, thank you to those who are communicating with Ryan so that he's able to push out some really great resources and information to everyone who's participating. Unfortunately, we can't just open up the chat given the previous scenario, but there's lots of good information in there, particularly as related to, for instance, Sylvia's point about doing comparisons with other English language learners with the same exposure that allows them to answer the question of language differences or versus disorder and that sort of thing. I know that Jane Wong had suggested, for instance, the Ortiz picture vocabulary acquisition test. The Ortiz PVAT was one that she had noted has EL norms that allow practitioners to compare ELs to other ELs at the same age with the same amount of exposure to English, for example. So again, various considerations with each of the potential assessments, but hopefully there'll be more research forthcoming. For instance, it could be featured in this special topics section on these types of assessments and to what degree they can help us parse this out. Another topic that's come up several times in here, and I really appreciate what Jorge and Sylvia have highlighted as related to the tremendous population growth and diversity of English language learners. And one of those populations clearly being Spanish speaking, Hispanic, Latinx students and families. But also a few of the questions have asked about other populations and whether those might be also of interest to feature in this special topics section.
That's a really good question. I spent quite a lot of time thinking about that. I think that folks should, submit. And excellent manuscripts are theoretically grounded, have conceptual frameworks that hopefully the research will add to the body of work, that depending on the nature of the language is generalizable. So I don't know, what do you think, Sylvia?
I agree. I think that we would be open to other language groups. I mean, that those other language groups, really, there's not much research in that area as well. And the reality is, in some places, ELs are a mix of different languages, right? Obviously, there's some areas where you might have whole classrooms of students that speak the same first language, but in other cases you don't, and that presents a different scenario that I think, where the implications for MTSS would be different, because students will all be learning in their second language, and so the types of supports and how you make decisions might be a little different, and I think that's a growing segment of classrooms, and it would be of interest to teachers and districts on how to best serve those students.
So the answer is yes, Jane.
Excellent. Yeah, that's super exciting, because clearly, as you've articulated and as the numbers have revealed for the past several decades, the tremendous growth in populations of Spanish-speaking children and families, right? But there's also quite a bit of growth in these other areas, and so it's really fantastic that you folks are open to having papers submitted for many different populations of children, linguistically diverse students broadly. And I like the way that you were highlighting there might be opportunities for looking for generalization among certain populations or crossover effects. And then, as Sylvia was also pointing out, there might be unique considerations among certain populations of linguistically diverse students. So no, that's super exciting. Another one that came up was, what about the use of MTSS in high school to assist English language learners? What about that topic? Either comments that you folks might have, and or would those types of papers be welcome for submission as well?
I think I'll punt that one to you, Sylvia. What are your thoughts?
I would say yes. Again, a very understudied group.
Exactly.
So people are doing research in that area. A lot of the students that are still classified as English learners in high school are either recent immigrants that came to the United States in middle school, or some of these students that have been labeled long-term ELs, right? So students that have been in our school systems since kindergarten, that for whatever reason fail to learn enough English to not be categorized. Sometimes it's because they have an identified disability. Sometimes it's an unidentified disability. So I think definitely understanding how we can better serve those students would be important to the field.
Agreed.
Excellent. Another one that had sort of surfaced in there, I know we're getting near our end of time, but another one that had surfaced was wanting to either hear more about your thoughts and or whether papers would be welcome regarding that intersectionality of special education and the various tiers of support for children who are linguistically diverse students.
Yeah, I would say yes. I think, what excites me about these questions is that as I'm listening to the questions, I'm thinking of the designs of these empirical studies that folks are thinking about. And I think the more we add to the body of research on MTSS, the more generalizable to different populations it is. And so I say bring it on. It works.
Love it. Great. And let me just flip through this one more time to see if there were, I know one other question that I might be able to respond to was that, what about if they have a great paper, a great study that's going right now, but things got delayed because of the COVID-19 context and they may not have that paper ready or prepared until after October. And certainly we're always open to your submissions. Again, the purpose of having a special topic section is to both bring further focused attention to the items and the matter and the topics of focus, but also to highlight that we want to feature this great research and scholarship in school psychology review. So regarding that question about what if you have a paper that's ready after October, absolutely submit it.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be able to be featured in, say, the exact special topic section that's published when all the papers are done, but maybe it will. Maybe yours will be one that's rapidly, reviewed and processed and favorably, if favorably accepted, then it would fit within that timeline. But the important point is this, that we're always open to these topics. And obviously Jorge, as a leader in school psych review, he's going to be around the next 4 or 5 years here, making contributions. We're hoping that Sylvia will stay engaged with us to continue to help provide leadership in this area. And especially like on this topic, you could easily see this being featured again 2 years from now, because I doubt we're going to solve everything within the next, 6 months, 18 months, right? Unfortunately. So the important part for each of you who ask those types of questions about timelines and such is absolutely, if you have a paper that's high quality, that was going to make an important contribution and it's past October, absolutely submit on this topic to school psych review. And you'll probably end up still having colleagues like Jorge and Sylvia, maybe even Lillian, that are willing to manage these types of manuscripts. Yeah.
Absolutely.
One more thing that just popped up here. Again, as noted in the chat box, Ryan has put links to the call for the special topic section as well as the others, but so that you can easily access that, that you can find it on the Taylor and Francis website, that you can find it on the National Association of School Psychologists website. And that, again, as I mentioned, if you have questions or ideas, more information that you would like to obtain or gain, then be in touch with us via email, right? This is another opportunity to meet these fabulous scholars. And I'm so grateful that we had Jorge and Sylvia with us today. And unfortunately, Lillian couldn't make it, but so wonderful that you're able to meet them and start these discussions and continue to engage in this these important discussions, as well as this important area of scholarship. I know we're just about out of time. Any other closing comments that either Jorge or Sylvia would like to share?
I just wanted to say thank you, Shane, for being interested in this special topic for school psych review. I think it's my impression that many folks struggle with this particular, how to address it, MTSS with English language learners. And oftentimes it's just something that sort of falls under the cracks, depending on how many of these linguistically diverse students are out in the field. So I am thrilled that School Psych Review has taken the lead in the field of school psychology.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jorge. So important. Any other comments you wanted to share, Sylvia?
Yeah, no, I second my thanks to you, Shane, and also to all the participants. I really look forward to reading and seeing the manuscripts that are submitted and helping and to push the field forward. So thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone who was able to join us. As Sylvia had highlighted, as Jorge, we express our tremendous appreciation and our gratitude for your participation. Sorry, our apologies about the bit of Zoom bombing hassle there. We've done about 10 of these and we hadn't had that yet, but so now is the first one, right, Jorge? And
That's right.
we got to share that experience today. We will be featuring a edited version of this presentation on the School Psychology Review YouTube channel. And so we can edit that portion out. We don't need to feature that in there, but it will be featured on the School Psych Review YouTube channel. And we hope that many of you, if your friends or colleagues were not able to get into the room once we did the lockdown, that you can share with them that information. And for those who had pre-registered, we will send out the link for that specific HTTP address where you can access it. They're free and they're available, but if you subscribe to the SPR YouTube channel, it will update you every time new videos are posted. So thank you again for joining us today. A big round of applause. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Ryan, for your tremendous support. Was even all the more incredibly valuable today to help us triage the situation. And we look forward to further communications. We look forward to many of your submissions and ongoing being readers and patrons of School Psych Review. So thank you.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.